So as promised, making up for some lost time here in the darkened dungeon of the hockey guy. It's my room. I don't mind the lighting so much. I know other people might. It's no big deal. We're talking about Montreal. It's the last time that the Stanley Cup came to Canada. This is 1993. So the 92-93 Montreal Canadiens beat Quebec 4-2. They were down 2-0 in that series. Quebec was steamrolling, and then they got steamrolled. They beat Buffalo in 4. They beat the Islanders in 4. They beat they beat the Islanders in 5, and then they beat LA in 5. You'll notice something. They didn't have to go through Pittsburgh. The round before Pittsburgh would have got into this one, Pittsburgh was in a 7-game fight against the Islanders. Going into Game 7, it was said by, I believe it was Kevin Stevens, great teams always win a Game 7, and we're the great team. The Islanders likely put that up on their board in the locker room, and they won Game 7. So the Islanders went on and lost. In the midst of this here, after losing 2, Montreal won 4 straight, and then 3 straight. They won 11 in a row, tying the record set the year before by the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Chicago Blackhawks. Now you look at this roster, and you've only got 2 Hall of Famers, Patrick Roy and Denis Savard. Savard didn't play a key role in this team winning the Stanley Cup. He was good during the regular season, he was decent during the postseason, but he wasn't a key factor. The key factor here is a very deep, good team. Guy Carbonneau. I don't understand why Carbonneau's not in the Hall of Fame. I don't. Bob Gainey's there. I think Carbonneau belongs there too. Obviously, Andre Rasico shouldn't be there, but think about it. Andre Rasico has the Stanley Cup ring. And think about the players that don't. Think about that for a second. Rob Ramage gets another cup ring. Kirk Muller earns himself a cup ring. Kirk Muller's a guy that I think you could put in the Hall, and I'd have a very hard time arguing against him going into the Hall. Mike Keane, Kevin Haller, Paul DiPietro before Rick would ruin the last name. John LeClair. You could make an argument for him going into the Hall. I don't think it ever happens. But before Montreal gave him to Philly, he was a very good player for them. Benoit, Brunet, Brian Bellows, another one that you could argue belongs in the Hall under certain circumstances. Lyle Odeline, Vinny Donfus. It's been mentioned in previous videos where I've talked about Vinny Donfus. There are people who believe that he has Hall of Fame credentials. Gary Lehman, likely never in the Hall. Matthew Schneider, also likely never in the Hall. Eric Desjardins, just a very solid top 4 defenseman. Good offensively, good defensively. Played for Team Canada more than once. Jesse Belanger. Think about that one. Jesse Belanger, not a star player by any measure, but on that Stanley Cup roster. Ed Ronan, Mario Roberge, Donald Dufresne, Todd Ewan, big, mean Todd Ewan. Roberge was pretty mean too. Sean Hill, Patrice Brisebois. Before the Montreal crowd turned against him, Brisebois was a member of this team, and he was a good defenseman. I always thought he got too much flack from Montreal crowds. I understood that. I mean, I've seen it in Vancouver somewhat with Edler. I've seen it with Toronto with Larry Murphy. It happens. Stéphane Lebeau and J.J. Daigneault. J.J. Daigneault would play for a lot of teams. Started out with Vancouver, moved on to Philly, ended up with Montreal, and won a cup ring while he was in Montreal. So good for him. Conn Smythe Trophy went to Patrick Roy, and this is why when people ask me, why is Patrick Roy the greatest goalie ever? He won all 16 games in this playoffs. He had a .929 save percentage, which was unheard of in hockey at that point. 2.13 goals against, 10 overtime wins. Out of their 16 wins, more than half of them were in overtime. If a game was going to overtime this year, it meant you were done. If you were not Montreal, you were dead. And there were different players who scored those overtime goals. There was no one guy to shut down. The one they needed to shut down was the goalie in net, Patrick Roy. He was fantastic. He was flawless in overtime. And he winked when he'd make the save. He was the master of going around the world with a save. He'd save it here and then bring his glove all the way around to make it look like, yeah, I got that one. And he'd snag it out of midair, and he'd always bring his arm over, like, I got it. And it got in the heads of the opposition more than once. He was capable of getting in your brain better than any goalie I ever saw. where it was overtime, he's in the zone, you're not getting it by him. It's not happening. And as a Bruins fan, it was tough to watch when he'd get into that zone and you go, oh, God, no, Patrick showed up. Oh, Raw's ready to go. It doesn't matter what Moog does. It doesn't matter what Lemelin does. It doesn't matter who we have in net. We're screwed. Patrick Roy, the greatest goalie I ever saw for that. So that's 2 Conn Smythes he won out of 2 championships Montreal won with him as their goaltender. And this was the second of those 2. And him being traded on Montreal absolutely is why Montreal didn't win another Stanley Cup after. But I've got annuals here that talk about how Patrick Roy probably isn't really a starter anymore. Well, he's in Montreal. Maybe he needs more time off. Yeah, they had Andre Rasico and J.C. Bergeron as backups for him. He wasn't getting time off. So, you look at the regular season, Vinny Donfus, 97 points. Muller, 94. Bellows, 88. LeBeau, 88, 80. Keane, 60. Savard, 50. Gilbert Dion with 48. Gilbert Dion with a cup ring, and his much older brother Marcel never got one. So that's just how weird this was. In the playoffs, Donfus leads the way again with 23 points. Muller with 17. Bellows, 15. Keane, 15. Desjardins, 14. DiPietro, 13. Dion, 12. Leclerc, 10. And if you're going to go with a runner-up for Conn Smythe, I would say Donfus and Desjardins would have been right there. And probably Muller. I mean, it was such a good team from top to bottom. And as I said, there's a number of guys you could go in through this roster and say, yeah, they probably belong in the Hall of Fame, and didn't get there. Penalty minutes. This team doesn't have the kind of penalty minutes that other teams that I've profiled had. But look at this. Donfus had 98. Keane had 95. Savard had 90. Desjardins had 98. Schneider had 91. Haller with 117. Lyle Odeline with 205. Todd Ewan with 193. And Mario Roberts with 142. So in terms of numbers, you had almost half the roster with near 100 penalty minutes or more. So this was a team that could take care of itself if it had to. But in the playoffs, they didn't take a lot of penalties. They were a very smart, well-coached team. And Jacques Lemaire got the best out of this team. It was, in my eyes, I think this was a more impressive Stanley Cup than 86. I think they had an easier time of it because a lot of the best teams got knocked out. They didn't have to go through Edmonton. They didn't have to go through Chicago. They didn't have to go through Pittsburgh. They got the Islanders and then they got the Kings. And of course, famously in the final, the Kings were, right there with it. And then there was the stick measurement and that was it. Montreal is a team that has always been keen on taking advantage of another team's penalties and making plays that go down in history. I'm a Bruins fan. I know all about it. Too many men on the ice for the Bruins. So, and keying on those mistakes is what Montreal's always done. So this was their umpteenth Stanley Cup. The question of whether or not Montreal can ever get back is answered this way. And it's simple. If Carey Price can prove that he really is another Patrick Roy, he has to get his name on the Conn Smythe Trophy. When people talk about, Carey Price, he's a Hall of Famer, Carey Price is great, Carey Price, he is the best goalie in the league. He is not a Patrick Roy. 10 overtime wins? No. 929 save percentage, 2.13 goals against, 16 wins. I'd love to see him equal any of those marks over 4 series. This again is at the end of the live puck era. So this was a team that was not built with tremendous offense. They had good offense, solid blue line, and an amazing goaltender. And even though I couldn't stand these guys when they played, and I couldn't stand watching Montreal win and go through teams I liked. I loved Quebec. I liked Buffalo. I was cheering for the Islanders in that series because they were underdogs to me against Montreal. And then the Kings, I didn't care. I really didn't. It was the first time a Stanley Cup had happened, and I went, I don't want to see Gretzky win another one though. So I did kind of cheer when Montreal won because for whatever reason, I didn't want to see Gretzky win one with the Kings. When I look back now, if you put me back there now with the mindset I have now, I probably would have cheered for Gretzky, but As it stood, I cheered for Montreal as what I felt was the lesser of two evils. All right, so you guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. And if you can remember those 10 overtimes, let me know who you think was the most key in the overtime victory cycle they had, other than Patrick Roy. Because there was definitely a psychological issue with any team that played Montreal in the playoffs that year. You could not beat them in overtime, and it was impressive. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and I'll talk to you again soon.